follow-ups if we look like we're not going to make the list. Go ahead.
Thank you. Bonjour à tous. Merci d'être des nôtres cet après-midi. Comme vous le savez, nous venons juste de conclure la session de printemps. Au cours des derniers mois, les députés ont passé de longues heures sur les bancs des communes. Tous les membres de notre caucus ont travaillé très fort en vue de remplir le mandat ambitieux que les Canadiens nous ont confié, s'élevant au-dessus des tactiques partisanes adoptées par les membres de l'opposition. Grâce à leur travail acharné, nous avons réussi à en faire beaucoup pour la classe moyenne et pour les gens qui travaillent fort pour en faire partie. Canadians sent us to Parliament Hill with a clear mandate: debate and pass legislation that will improve their lives, benefit their families, and make their communities even better places to call home. Our government has worked hard to deliver on that mandate. Back in January, we had an important legislative agenda before us in Parliament, and while we still have a lot to do, we've made good progress on the issues that matter most to Canadians. Nous avons d'abord déposé notre troisième budget, qui vise à combler les écarts qui persistent sur le marché du travail et qui font obstacle à notre prospérité commune. Le budget de 2018 prévoit notamment plus d'aide pour les travailleurs à faible revenu et pour les familles de la classe moyenne. Nous avons introduit l'allocation canadienne des travailleurs, un nouveau crédit d'impôt remboursable, plus accessible, plus simple et plus généreux qu'avant, qui aidera près de 70 000 personnes à sortir de la pauvreté d'ici 2020.
Now
Nous avons
in
également
2020,
indexé l'allocation canadienne pour enfants.
we've also indexed the Canadian Child Benefit to rates of inflation so that if the price of groceries goes up, so do the touts. The budget also has measures aimed at supporting small business and veterans.
45, which will legalize and strictly regulate access to cannabis. We will soon have a new system in place, one that keeps cannabis out of the hands of our kids and keeps profits away from organized crime. Today, I'm also pleased to announce that the new recreational cannabis regime will officially come into force on October 17th of this year. We heard from provinces and territories who told us they needed more time to transition to this new framework. So our government will continue to work in full partnership with them to ensure the smooth and orderly implementation of this new law across Canada. We also introduced legislation to strengthen Canada's gun laws and keep our communities safe from the threat of gun violence. Among other things, our proposed package of common sense reforms will get illegal handguns and assault weapons off our streets, a package the Conservatives continue to oppose, I might add. We've also passed C-68 and C-69 in the House of Commons, which will restore environmental protections that were lost under the previous Conservative government. In the interest of transparency and openness, we also moved forward legislation on political fundraising. With Bill C-50, Canadians will know more about the way in which the Prime Minister, Cabinet Ministers, party leaders, and leadership contenders of all parties fundraise. Movements like Me Too and Time's Up have brought into sharp focus just how widespread and, sadly, how commonplace sexual harassment is in the workplace. It's unacceptable, and we must take action. We moved forward Bill C-65, which is an important step towards freeing our places of work from these kinds of toxic behaviors. And finally, today, we introduced new, transformative federal accessibility legislation in Parliament. Once in place, the legislation and accompanying initiatives will help eliminate barriers and ensure greater accessibility and opportunities for Canadians with disabilities. Nous continuons de faire des investissements judicieux et ciblés.
We'll continue to invest wisely and in a targeted way to help families and grow the economy. That's been our strategy. Since the beginning, it's a strategy that works and makes a real difference in the lives of Canadians.
Over the past year, our economy has been the strongest in the G7, and unemployment is near the lowest level it's been in more than 40 years. In fact, there are over 600,000 Canadians working today who weren't working when we first took office. And total wage amounts in Canada are growing at their fastest rate in 9 years. Our plan to create jobs and grow the economy is working, but we still have a lot of work ahead of us. These are just a few of the important pieces of legislation that will help middle-class families grow jobs and grow the economy. Je sais que je parle pour tous les membres de notre caucus lorsque
I know
je dis
that I
que nous
speak for
profiterons
all
de l'été
members of our
pour
caucus
rencontrer
when
et
I say
écouter les
that we'll spend the
Canadiens
summer
qui habitent nos circonscriptions.
meeting with and listening to
Nous voulons
Canadians
connaître
in
leurs
our ridings.
préoccupations et leurs
We
attentes
want to know
pour mieux
what
défendre
concerns
leurs
them
intérêts
and how to
à
best
Ottawa.
defend their interests in
Après tout,
Ottawa.
les conversations
After
que
all,
nous aurons pendant l'été
the conversations we have
alimenteront et inspireront
over the
nos
summer
travaux
will
cet
inform
automne.
and inspire our work
Avant de
this
passer
fall.
aux questions,
Before we go to
je tiens
questions,
encore une fois à
I'd like
remercier
once
tous les
again
membres
to
de la
thank all
tribune de la
members of the
presse.
press
Je
gallery.
sais que vous avez travaillé
I
très
know
fort
that
tout au
you've
long de
worked
cette séance de
very
printemps.
hard
Alors, merci,
throughout
comme
this
toujours,
spring
pour tout ce
session,
que
so
vous faites.
thank you for all that
Je
you
suis
do.
maintenant
And
très
now,
heureux de prendre vos
I'll be
questions.
happy to entertain your questions.
Fanny Olivier, Presse Canadienne.
We'll begin with Fanny Olivier, or Radio-Canada, rather. Hello, Mr. Trudeau. My first question has to do with Donald Trump. What did you learn this year? And what will it change in your way of doing business with him? I believe it's clear that the way we have engaged with the President has been the right one. We've established the ability to have real conversations with him, and we have sought to develop points of mutual interest and to find ways to work to get important messages to the White House and the United States to let them know that our economies are strongly linked and that impacts on Canada will have an impact on the United States as well, and we'll continue to work together despite differences in order to benefit our citizens.
Learned that our approach from the beginning involved engaging with all members of the administration in developing a direct contact with the President by me so we could have frank and direct conversations about where we disagree, but also how we can move forward together on issues that benefit citizens in both our countries. Also the capacity to highlight that measures taken against Canada will often have negative impacts on workers in the United States is continuing to be an ongoing argument we make and will continue to make through all the different channels of communications we have with the White House.
Mr. Trudeau, you fulfilled your promise to legalize marijuana, but a few weeks ago you broke one of your 2015 provinces. With respect to Kinder Morgan, you said that you would put an end to subsidies. You would gradually put an end to subsidizing fossil energies. Don't you think this will disappoint your ecologist friends?
C'est en créant de la croissance économique en même temps.
Well, I believe that we will be supporting the environment at the same time. We'll also be supporting the economy and jobs. This is why we will be investing $8 billion in the future in new technologies and clean forms of energy. This is how we intend to manage our transition towards new forms of energy. And at the same time, we want to make sure that we have access to new markets for our natural resources. We lose $15 billion every year because we are the prisoners, the captives of one market, the United States, for our oil resources. We want to be able to invest in things in the economy that will benefit all Canadians, and I trust that Canadians know that we don't have to choose between the environment and the economy.
Mr. Prime Minister, we know that you've seen with Donald Trump in the past that when he makes a threat, he follows through, as we've seen with steel and aluminum tariffs. The newest threat is to put tariffs on the auto sector. Now, we've heard from you and we've heard from Foreign Affairs Minister Chrystia Freeland that the government is preparing for any eventuality. But for the average Canadian worker, for the auto worker who's sitting at home in Windsor, Ontario, watching this, what should they be doing to prepare? Should they be saving their money? Should they skip a vacation in case they're about to lose their job? What should that person be doing?
I think, first of all, reassuring that person, as we've been reassuring Canadians who work in the steel industry, who work in the aluminum industry, who worked in forestry, that we are there as a government to support them. We know that thousands upon thousands of Canadians across this country, particularly in Ontario, depend on the auto industry for good jobs, to support their families, to support their communities. We will continue to support them. We will continue to work with the United States to demonstrate that moving forward on these tariffs would be damaging to Canada, sure, but it would also be very damaging to the United States and to the auto sector and auto manufacturers in the United States. We continue to group together allies on both sides of the border to make that case, and we continue to stand up for Canada's interests.
But as a follow-up, what should they be doing? Should they just continue on life with status quo? And as a further follow-up, my colleague David Cochran wants to know, will you give Hassan Diab the public inquiry he's asking for?
I think for Hassan Diab, we have to recognize, first of all, that what happened to him never should have happened. This is something that obviously was an extremely difficult situation to go through for himself, for his family, and that's why we've asked for an independent external review to look into exactly how this happened and make sure that it never happens again.
David Lundgren, Reuters.
Minister, last month you told us and other media outlets you were pretty convinced that the threatened U.S. auto tariffs were a negotiating tactic for NAFTA. To what extent does that remain your conviction?
I think one of the things that we've seen from the President is that he prides himself on a certain degree of unpredictability. The challenge for us is that we know that certain actions, the movement on steel and aluminum, for example, will hurt American workers as well as cause challenges for Canadian industry and Canadian workers. I have to continue to believe that leaders will function in the interests of their own country, and I have a hard time accepting that any leader might do the kind of damage to his own auto industry that would happen if he were to bring in such a tariff on Canadian auto manufacturers, given the integration of the parts supply chain, of the auto supply chains through the Canada-U.S. border. This is something we're going to continue to demonstrate, continue to impress upon our friends and partners in the United States, and hopefully we will continue to demonstrate that it is always better to work together than to create barriers to the most successful trading relationship in the world.
And secondly, if he does impose these tariffs, you've made quite clear that there's some sort of aid coming for the workers. Now you're already spending almost $1 billion in softwood lumber. You and your Minister of Foreign Affairs have made quite clear that an aid package will be coming for metals workers. Plus, you have an autos possible bailout. At what point are you concerned about the effect this is going to have on the budget deficit at a time when the Conservatives are focusing on you for allegedly mismanaging public finances?
I'm going to stay focused on supporting Canadian jobs, Canadian workers. I'm going to continue to make sure that families have food to put on their tables, and that we continue to invest in the kind of high-quality skills training and education that Canadian young people, Canadian workers continue to need to compete in a global economy, in global supply chains. I will never apologize for making sure that we are there to support Canadian workers, Canadian industry, full stop.
Maxime Bergeron, La Presse.
Maxime Bergeron, La Presse. Well, in a week, you will be bringing in retaliatory tariffs. Any conversations that you may have with Mr. Trump? Well, we were clear about imposing tariffs, retaliatory tariffs, because of American actions. Our Foreign Affairs Minister, Chrystia Freeland, is in constant contact with Mr. Lighthizer and people in the administration who know that we are going forward with these steps. We regret having to go forward with these measures, but we can't let things stand as they stand at the moment. We're continuing negotiations to improve NAFTA, and we'll continue negotiating throughout the summer. But with respect to NAFTA negotiations, Will there be, are there meetings planned? Yes, we have planned meetings. I don't have the exact dates, but this is the intention of both Canadian and U.S. negotiators, Mexican as well, during the presidential transition period in Mexico.
I'm wondering, since the steel and aluminum tariffs were imposed, and since then we've had the threat on the autos, we've had the president's unprecedented Twitter attack on you. And we've had complaints about dairy and supply management, and even, Canadians wearing stuffed American shoes to smuggle them across the border. Why do you think that Canada is suddenly so much in Donald Trump's crosshairs? Is this just a tactic to drive a harder bargain on NAFTA? Is it personal or what?
I recognize, I think we all recognize that the relationship between Canada and the United States is closer and more complex and deeper than the relationship perhaps in any two countries in the world. The level of coordination, complementarity, collaboration between our two economies leaves lots of issues that one could pluck at and tug on if one wants to make points or push a certain narrative. But I'm going to remain focused on the fact that this relationship has been also one of the most successful trading relationships in the history of the modern world, where two countries have worked together, grown together, and prospered together in innumerable ways over the past decades, over the past century and a half, to the tremendous benefit of citizens in both our countries. And there have always been challenges in a relationship as deep and complex as this one. But my focus remains on the tremendous benefits that we can continue to draw if we work together thoughtfully in ways that create the win-wins that we know are out there.
What is then the narrative that you think is behind this sudden focus on Canada and all the little plucking of all these little grapes then?
I'm not in a position to opine on motivations of the president. I'm going to stay focused on the relationship that we're building, on defending Canada's interests, on looking for ways to further push the benefits of improving and modernizing NAFTA that will accrue to peoples in all three of our countries.
Le devoir, je ne sais pas si c'est Manon.
Le devoir, is it Manon? With respect to cannabis, Mr. Trudeau, why not decide to give amnesty now? Well, because the present legislation will still exist between now and October 17th, and we will be bringing in a new system that will regulate marijuana. And until the new act is in effect, the former act remains. Once it comes into effect, then we will look at the whole question of amnesty and pardons. But until the legislation is changed, it would be illogical to start talking about amnesties and pardons while the present law still exists.
As I've said a number of times, until the actual coming into force date happens and the law is changed, there's no point looking at pardons while the old law is on the books. We've said we will look at next steps once the new coming into force happens, but between now and then, the current regime stays. I want to remind everyone that the reason we are moving forward on the legalization of marijuana is to better protect our kids, to better protect our communities, and to remove the profits from the pockets of organized crime. $6 billion a year by some estimates. Obviously, the current approach, the current prohibition on marijuana has not worked to protect our kids, to keep the money out of the profits of organized crime, and that's why we are bringing in a new legalized framework around marijuana. We've said a number of times that we're happy to work and collaborate with the provinces. We will continue to do that. The provinces have asked us for more time than they originally thought they would need in order to get the implementation right, and I think we all agree it's important to get this right and not rushed, and that's why we're moving forward with legalization on October, coming into force date as of October 17th, 2018. Je pense que les gens comprennent que nous avançons avec un régime qui va
people will understand that we're going forward with a regime which will help us to control marijuana, because the present regime does not work to protect our children, our communities, and really benefits criminals and criminal activity. We will have a new system which will better protect young people and communities, and we will be listening to what provinces have to say. We have listened to give them more time to have a system that truly works. Question. But for those who say that there are crimes that are crimes now, but that won't be in 4 months, what about growing plants at home? And how is it that growing marijuana at home will thwart organized crime when there are big consumers who might decide to go elsewhere to get their cannabis? Well, at the present time, we're dealing with cannabis as we would with alcohol or tobacco. We know that it's allowed to make your own wine, to make your own cigarettes, to grow your own tobacco. Very few people do this, but some do. They do it in a controlled way that is regulated by law. So if people want to grow plants for personal consumption, it will be necessary to have the measures necessary to counter organized crime.
First off, on cannabis, what's your expectations for October 17th? Chaos, organized sales, and how long do you think the transition, you talked about the smooth transition, how long do you think it will take for the system to actually be working at full?
Well, it is our hope that as of October 17th, there will be a smooth operation of retail cannabis outlets operated by the provinces with an online mail delivery system operated by the provinces that will ensure that that this happens in an orderly fashion. One of the things that we heard very clearly from the provinces is that they need a certain amount of time to get their bricks and mortar stores, their online sales ready. Producers need time to be able to actually prepare for a regimented and successful implementation of the regime. And because our goal on this is very much with a public safety and public health lens, making sure we're protecting our kids, making sure we're protecting our communities, making sure we're replacing the organized crime that right now is the seller of marijuana to citizens. This is something that we want to get right, and it is our expectation that even though we recognize that a legalization of marijuana is a process, not a single-day event, by giving the provinces more time to ensure that they are fully ready for the day of coming into force of this legislation, it will be a smooth success in all the ways that we can hope for.
Back to the U.S. issue, should Canadians boycott U.S. goods and destinations in response to the actions of the U.S. administration?
I think Canadians will continue to make their choices. One of the things that we did moving forward on tariffs on July 1st is ensure that the products for which we are putting tariffs on them, on items coming in from the United States, have readily available substitutes, either Canadian-made or made in countries that do not have tariffs to import into Canada. We want to make sure that Canadians can look for substitutes and are not harmed by our retaliatory options. As for Canadians, I'm always one to encourage Canadians to discover our extraordinary country, to take vacations here at home, to continue to buy Canadian, and if Canadians are looking for extra reasons to do so, then so be it. But I think it's important for Canadians to make their own choices about how they want to spend their money.
Presse canadienne.
Canadian Press. You talked about President Trump's predictability with respect to these children who've been separated from their families. What's preventing you from suspending this agreement with the U.S. when we know what Mr. Trump is doing? Well, we take action based on facts and not on fears or worries. We're working closely with the Americans on many issues having to do with security, with borders, and with our agreements on all kinds of things. We'll continue to work with the Americans. We'll continue following closely how the United States behaves in this situation with the children. As I have said, it's unacceptable. But we see that the President made certain statements today or has given certain directions. I don't have anything more than that, but we do hope that the Americans will protect people. But it is a fact that 2,000 children have been separated from their parents, and they're being kept in cages. What more do you need? Well, as I said, it's unacceptable. What the Americans are doing is unacceptable. It's not just me who said it. All kinds of Americans, including Republicans, have said that this is unacceptable. It seems that they want to change their approach. We hope they'll improve the system. But as far as we're concerned, this cannot last. The situation cannot last.
The relationship between you and President Trump since the G7 has seemed a little tense, at least from the outside. Have you spoken to him personally since the G7?
I have not, but we continue to make sure that our folks are in regular contact. We're continuing to work on NAFTA renegotiations. I think the next time I'll be seeing him is at the NATO summit in Brussels, and I look forward to continuing to have a constructive relationship with him, in which I will continue to stand up for Canadian interests. I think my approach on this relationship has been very much aligned with what Canadians expect of me. Be firm about defending Canadian values and Canadian interests, but always look to have a constructive relationship that will benefit Canadians and the nature of our closely integrated economies.
We did personally and directly attack you as he left the G7. Did that shock you, especially as he was heaping praise on the North Korean leader at the same time?
Look, I think as politicians, we develop a certain amount of thick skins, and I stay focused on what we need to do to advance the common causes we have, and I'm not going to react to personal comments. I'm going to stay focused on the work we need to do together.
We have only a few minutes left, and I'd like to go just one question each. Rachel Gilmore, iPolitics.
Once marijuana is legalized, will Canada have enough pot to meet demand?
I think we are confident that at the beginning we're going to take a significant part of the market share, right now occupied almost entirely by organized crime, away, and over the following months and indeed years, we will completely replace or almost completely replace the organized crime market on that.
Joyce Napier, CTV.
Good afternoon, Prime Minister. You lost a seat in Quebec a few days ago in the Saguenay region, and this after you campaigned there a couple of times. You expressed support to protect supply management, support for the aluminum industry, two big issues there. What message are you coming away with?
I think we continue to work extremely hard on the ground. I was glad to campaign there, as I've campaigned in every single by-election since I've not just become Prime Minister, but since I've become a leader of the Liberal Party. I will continue to. Obviously, the electors spoke clearly, but I certainly take a certain amount of solace in the fact that the vote percentage of the Liberal Party stayed stable. We obviously have to reflect on the shifting landscape in Quebec with what happened to the NDP vote and the Bloc vote, but I think we're still obviously too early to draw significant conclusions about about what's going to happen a year from now, but we will continue to work very hard in every region of Quebec, in every region of the country, to make sure that our message is getting through.
Bruce Campion-Smith, Toronto Star.
Prime Minister, good afternoon. Just wondering if you could reflect on, you have a new premier at Queen's Park, and just reflect on that relationship, quite different than Premier Wynne. And just in particular, you know, Mr. Ford has said he will not bring in a carbon tax. Just wondering, does that then open the door for Ottawa then to impose a carbon tax, you know, on Ontario residents?
I think, first of all, I've made it very clear in the past 2.5 years that I'm willing to work collaboratively with all premiers across this country on ways to benefit their citizens and citizens across the country. This is something that I think I've demonstrated in a collaborative federalism approach, and will continue to work with all premiers, including the new premier designate. On the environment, the Premier Designate has notified us that he intends to withdraw from the National Climate Plan. This is obviously unfortunate. We would rather he not do that, but since he's notified that he's withdrawing from the National Climate Plan, we need to continue to ensure that we move forward on both growing the economy and protecting the environment at the same time. As I've said many times, we're going to ensure that monies collected in any jurisdiction are returned to the citizens of that jurisdiction. And I will highlight that the legislation we just passed allows us, in cases of using the federal backstop, to directly return monies collected in Ontario to Ontarians. And that is certainly our intention to do that, unless the provinces like British Columbia, for example, move forward with their own sufficiently ambitious plan, which BC has had in a long time, to meet our climate targets.
Maura Forrest, National Post.
Yes, Prime Minister, you said in the House of Commons today that you were looking for ways to update the Safe Third Country Agreement. In what way are you looking to update the agreement, and are you still looking to potentially strengthen it to reduce the number of asylum seekers coming into the country?
There have been ongoing conversations at the informal level between our officials and American officials on a Safe Third Country for quite a while now. As we know, it's a 10-year-old agreement, and there's always opportunities to strengthen and improve. One of the issues that we have certainly worked very hard to counter is, first of all, the perception that irregularly crossing into Canada is somehow a shortcut through our immigration system. It is not. Everyone who comes across our border regularly or irregularly will be put through our asylum process, which will determine whether or not they are actually refugees fleeing violence, persecution, terrorism, war, and therefore qualify for asylum. And if they do not qualify as asylum seekers, they will be returned to their country of origin. That is the system that we have. We are an open, welcoming country. We have a very generous immigration system, but for people who are using shortcuts into our asylum, or trying to use shortcuts into our asylum system, they will find out that they are not shortcuts at all, and that coming into our country irregularly does not get you around the system, because we still fully apply our system in its integrity to anyone who arrives, whether it's regular or irregular.
That concludes our press conference, sir. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Tonda. Merci beaucoup tout le monde. Bon été.